In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to my humble little show. This is the Spook Zone. Probably not even the scariest show on Air 3 Radio. And it's Halloween in not even 4 days. I have the mathematic capacity of a rat. It is in 6 days, to my knowledge. It's the 31st. Yeah, I'm going to say it's the 31st. I think that's correct. Who knows? I might be wrong. Oh, and by the way, if you are an Eldritch Abomination, please stop reading my mail before I've opened it. Just because I know you're there, and I know you're, looking out over us and just waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike, doesn't mean I'm going to be telling everybody about it. I'm not that thick. I think. You never know. But still, a man's private information is his own, so don't just stop reading my things. Please. Thank you. Okay, so, what have we got on the agenda today? Well, first, of course, we've got some Lovecraft. Here's the book. Loud. Very good. I like that. I like how loud it is. Wow, that was very loud this time. I think that definitely peaked. Whoops, sorry about that. But we've also got some internet stories as well. Hopefully, some very good ones, because I have chosen them, and I'm pretty good at judging whether a thing is scary or not, I think. I assume. Might be wrong about that. You tell me. Don't tell me, because I have serious crippling self-esteem issues. Don't tell me about my problems, please. Anyway, so, what is the first thing we're going to read out of Little Lovecraft's, well, it's a compendium. It's, I'm going to actually say this every time I open this bloody book, because you know what? You should buy it if you have the money. It's expensive. Don't buy it if you're poor. This is the commemorative edition of the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. It's got a little squid on the front. It's great. So, my first story for you is a little bit, well, it's a bit weird. It's about cats, and it's about how in this place, which is far away from here in this mystical land, you're not allowed to kill them. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. You're going to figure that out as I read it. But, it's a bit of a weird law. So, you know what? Let's find out. Let's figure out why cats can't be killed. I mean, you shouldn't be killing cats anyway. Cats are, I was going to say nice creatures. They're creatures. You shouldn't be killing mammals, at least. Why am I saying mammals only? I'm being speciesist to this point. This is ridiculous. Anyway, let's get back to business. And by back to business, I mean back to Spook, because that's what we're here for. This is H.P. Lovecraft's The Cats of Ulthar. It is said that in Ulthar, which lies beyond the river Skye, no man may kill a cat. And this I can verily believe as I gaze upon him which sitteth purring before the fire. For the cat is cryptic and close to strange things which men cannot see. He is the soul of antique, Egyptus, and the bearer of tales of forgotten cities in Meroe and Ophir. He is the king of the jungle's lords, and heir to the secrets of hoary and sinister Africa. The Sphinx is his cousin, and he speaks a language, but he is more ancient than the Sphinx, and remembers that which he has forgotten. In Ulthar, before ever the burgess forbade the killing of cats, there dwelt an old cotter and his wife, who delighted to trap and slay the cats of their neighbours. Why they did this, I know not, save that many hate the voices of the cat at night, and take it ill that cats should run stealthily about yards and gardens at twilight. But whatever the reason, this old man and woman took pleasure in trapping and slaying every cat which came near their hovel. And from some of the sounds heard after dark, many villagers fancies that the matter of slaying was exceedingly peculiar. But the villagers did not discuss such things with the old man and his wife because of the habitual expression on the withered faces of the two, and because their cottage was so small and so darkly hidden under spreading oaks at the back of the neglected yard. In truth, much as the owners of the cats hated these old folk, they feared them more, and instead of berating them as brutal assassins, merely took care that no cherished pet or mouser should stray toward the remote hovel under the dark trees. When, through some unavoidable oversight, a cat was missed, and sounds heard after dark, the loser would lament impotently or console himself by thanking fate that it was not one of his children who had thus vanished. For the people of Ulthar was simple, and knew not whence it is all cats first came. One day, a caravan of strange wanderers from the south entered the narrow, cobbled streets of Ulthar. Dark wanderers they were, and unlike the other roving folk who passed through the village twice each year, in the marketplace they told fortunes with silver and bought gay beads from the merchants. What was the lands of these wanderers none could tell, but it was seen that they were given to strange prayers, and that they had painted on the sides of their wagons strange figures with human bodies and their heads of cats, hawks, rams, and lions. And the leader of the caravan wore a headdress with 2 horns and a curious disc between the horns. There was this singular caravan, a little boy with no father or mother, but one tiny black kitten to cherish. Now, the plague had not been kind to him, yet had left him this small, furry thing to mitigate his sorrow. When one is very young, one can find great relief in the lively antics of a black kitten. So, the boy, whom the dark people called Menes, smiled more often than he wept, as he sat playing with this graceful kitten on the steps of an oddly painted wagon. On the third morning of the wanderer's stay in Ulthar, Menes could not find his kitten, and as he sobbed aloud in the marketplace, certain villagers told him of the old man and his wife, and of sounds heard in the night. And when he heard these things, his sobbing gave place to meditation, and finally to prayer. He stretched out his arms toward the sun and prayed in a tongue no villager can understand, though indeed the villagers did not try very hard to understand, since their attention was mostly taken up by the sky and the odd shapes the clouds were assuming. It was very peculiar, but as the little boy uttered his petition, there seemed to form overhead the shadowy, nebulous figures of exotic things. Hybrid creatures, crowned with horn-flanked discs. Nature is full of such illusions to impress the imaginative. That night the wanderers left Ulthar, and never was seen again, and the householders were troubled when they noticed that in all the village there was not a cat to be found. From each hearth the familiar cat had vanished, cats large and small, black, grey, striped, yellow and white. Old Cranon, the burgomaster, swore that the dark folk had taken the cats away for revenge of the killing of Menes' kitten, and cursed the caravan and the little boy. But Nith, the lean notary, declared that the old cotter and his wife were more likely persons to suspect, for their hatred of cats was notorious and increasingly bold. Still, no one durst complain to the sinister couple, and even when little Atal, the innkeeper's son, vowed that he at twilight had seen all the cats in Ulthar in that accursed yard under the trees, pacing very slowly and solemnly in a circle around the cottage, two abreast, as if in performance of some unheard-of rite of beasts, the villagers did not know how much to believe from such a small boy. And though they feared that the evil pair had charmed the cats to their death, they preferred not to chide the old cotter till they met him outside his dark and repellent yard. So Ulthar went to sleep in vain anger, and when the people awakened at dawn, behold, every cat was back at its accustomed hearth. Large, small, black, grey, striped, yellow, and white. None was missing. Very sleek and fat with one another of the affair. Oh, I apologize, I just skipped a bit. I should try that again. Very sleek and fat did the cats appear, and sonorous with purring content. Now the citizens talked with one another of the affair, and marvelled not a little. Old Crannan again insisted that it was the dark folk who had taken them, since cats did not return alive from that cottage of the ancient man and his wife, but all agreed on one thing, that the refusal of the cats to eat their portions of meat or drink their sources of milk was exceedingly curious. And for 2 whole days the sleek, lazy cats of Ulthar would touch no food, but only doze by the fire or in the sun. It was fully a week before the villagers noticed that no lights were appearing at dusk in the windows of the cottage under the trees. Then the lean Nith remarked that no one had seen the old man or his wife since the night the cats were away. In another week, the burgomaster decided to overcome his fears and call at the strangely silent dwelling as a matter of duty. Though, in so doing, he was careful to take with him Shang, the blacksmith, and Thul, the cutter of stone, as a witness. And when they had broken down the frail door, they found only this: 2 cleanly picked human skeletons on the earthen floor, and a number of singular beetles crawling in the shadowy corners. There was subsequently much talk among the burgesses of Ulthar. Zath, the coroner, disputed at length with Neith, the lean notary, and Crannan and Shang and Thul were overwhelmed with questions. Even little Atal, the innkeeper's son, was closely questioned and given a sweet meat as reward. They talked of the old cotter and his wife, the caravan, of the dark wanderers, of small Menez and his black kitten, of the prayer of Menez and of the sky during that prayer, of the doings of the cats on the night the caravan left, and of what was later found in the cottage under the dark trees, in the repellent yard. And in the end, the burgesses passed that remarkable law which is told of by traders in Hatheg and discussed by travellers at Near, namely, that in Ulthar no man may kill a cat. Oh, that was fun. Cats, don't kill them, or you will get eaten by their kin, because they're feisty little demons, and they will rip the bones off of your flesh. Got it the wrong way round. They'll rip the flesh off of your bones. That'd be horrifying if there was a creature that just ate your bones as opposed to your flesh, and you were just wobbling about the place like a big old sack of jelly. And no, don't actually imagine that. That's terrifying. Oy vey, etc. You know, that's some horrifying stuff right there. But we're not done with Lovecraft. As you may have noticed from my last show, it rather ended quite what's the word? Quickly? Yeah, quickly is the word I'll use, because I didn't read that much, and considering it was my first show, I don't blame myself. However, considering that I am back into the groove, so to speak, and I know what I am doing, or at least I think I know what I'm doing, I assume, I hope and pray that I know what I'm doing, I am going to continue reading another story of Lovecraft. Ooh, baby, you're thinking, now that's the stuff right there. I like me some Lovecraft, and you're probably saying, well, at least some of you are saying, like, oh god, not more Lovecraft, his words are stupid and large, and he keeps talking about things in large flowery language that nobody cares about. Blech. Well, I say to you this. You know, each to his own. You can have your opinion. It's just that your opinion might be different from others, so shh. And just keep listening until the next part of the show, where I might find some spooky bits from the internet, which might be slightly more varied and, not conversational, but more I'm trying to think of the word that you use to describe something that's set in modern day. What is it? I can't even remember what it is. What is wrong with me? Contemporary. That's the word, contemporary. Yeah, we'll look at some more contemporary writing, and you'll be happy about that, because you know what? People writing spooky stories nowadays, I love it, because people deserve to write, and should write more, including you. You should write more, because writing is great, and you can spook people with it, or you can do other things. Who cares? Anyway, this next story is a little thing about two men, one of which is left alive. Now, they both find a catacomb of some kind, and one of them decides to go down. And you can only imagine what happened next. What I read to you now is the other man's statement, the one who lived. And, well, he was positively shaken by the incident. This is the statement of Randolph Carter. I repeat to you, gentlemen, that your inquisition is fruitless. Detain me here forever, if you will, confine or execute me if you must have a victim to appropriate the illusion that you call justice. But I can say no more than I have said already. Everything that I can remember I have told you with perfect candor. Nothing has been distorted or conceded, and if everything or anything remains vague, it is only because of the dark cloud which has come over my mind. That cloud of the nebulous nature of the horrors which brought it upon me. Again, I do say I don't know what has become of Harley Warren, though I think, almost hope, he is in peaceful oblivion, if there be anywhere so blessed a thing. It is true that I have for 5 years been his closest friend and a partial sharer of his terrible researches into the unknown. I will not deny, though my memory is uncertain and indistinct, that this witness of yours may have seen us together, as he says, on the Gainesville Pike, walking towards Big Cypress Swamp at 11:30 on that awful night. That we bore electric lanterns, spades, and a curious coil of wire with attached instruments, I will even affirm. For these things all played a part in a single hideous scene, which remains burned into my shaken recollection. But of what followed, and of the reason I was found alone and dazed on the edge of the swamp next morning, I must insist that I know nothing, save what I have told you, over and over again. You say to me that there is nothing in the swamp or near it which could have formed the setting of that frightful episode. I reply that I knew nothing beyond what I saw. Vision or nightmare it may have been. Vision or nightmare, I fervently hope it was. Yet it is all that my mind retains of what took place in those shocking hours after we left the sight of men, and why Harley Warren did not return, he or his shade, or some nameless thing I cannot describe. Alone can tell. As I have said before, the weird studies of Harley Warren were well known to me, and to some extent shared by me. Of his vast collection of strange, rare books on forbidden subjects, I have read all that were written in the languages of which I am a master, but these are few, as compared with those in languages I cannot understand. Most, I believe, are in Arabic, and the fiend-inspired book which brought us on the end, the book which he carried in his pocket out of the world, was written in characters in whose like I conceive I have never seen anywhere. Warren would never tell me what was in that book as to the nature of our studies. Well, I must say again that I no longer retain full comprehension. It seems to me rather merciful that I do not, for they were terrible studies, which I pursued more through reluctant fascination than through actual inclination. Warren always dominated me, and sometimes I feared him. I remember How I shuddered at his facial expression on the night before the awful happening, when he talked so incessantly of his theory, why certain corpses never decay, but rest firm and fat in their tombs for 1,000 years. But I do not fear him now, for I suspect he has known horrors beyond my ken. Now I fear for him. Now once more I say, I have no clear of our object on that night. Certainly it had much to do with something in the book of which Warren carried with him, that ancient book in undecipherable characters which had come to him from India a month before. But I swear I do not know what it was that I expected to find. Your witness says he saw us at 11:30 on the Gainesville Pike, headed for Big Cypress Swamp. This is probably true, but I have no distinct memory of it. The picture seared into my soul is one of scene only, and the hour must have been long after midnight, for waning crescent moon was high in the vaporous heavens. The place was an ancient cemetery, so ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. It was in a deep, damp hollow, overgrown with rank grass, moss, and curious creeping weeds, and filled with a vague stench which my idle fancy associated absurdly with rotting stone. On each hand were signs of neglect and decrepitude, and I seemed haunted by the notion that Warren and I were the first living creatures to invade a lethal silence of centuries. Over the valley's rim, a wan, waning crescent moon peered through the noisome vapours that seemed to emanate from unheard-of catacombs, and by its feeble, wavering beams I could distinguish a repellent array of antique slabs, urns, centre-paths, and mausoleum facades, all crumbling, moss-grown, and moisture-stained, and partly concealed by the gross luxuriance of the unearthly vegetation. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible necropolis concerns the act of pausing with Warren before a certain half-obliterated sepulchre, and of throwing down some burdens which he seemed to have been carrying. I now observed that I had with me an electric lantern and 2 spades, while my companion was supplied with a similar lantern and a portable telephone outlet. No word was uttered, for the spots and the talk seemed known to us, and without delay we seized our spades and commenced to clear away the grass, weeds, and drifted earth from the flat archaic mortuary, and, after uncovering the entire surface, which consisted of 3 immense granite slabs, we stepped back some distance to survey the charnel scene, and Warren appeared to make some mental calculations. Then he returned to the sepulchre, and using his spade as a lever, sought to pry up the slab lying nearest to a story ruin which may have been a monument in his day. He did not succeed, and motioned me to come to his assistance, and finally our combined strength loosened the stone, which we raised and tipped to one side. The removal of the slab revealed a black aperture, from which rushed an effluence of miasmal gases, so nauseous that we started back in horror, and after an interval we approached the pit again and found the exhalations less unbearable. Our lanterns disclosed the top of a flight of stone steps, dripping with some detestable ichor of the inner earth, and bordered by some moist walls encrusted with nitre. And now, for the first time, my memory records verbal discourse. Warren, addressing me at length in his mellow tenor voice, a voice singularly unperturbed by our awesome surroundings. "I'm sorry to have to ask you to stay on the surface," he said, "but it would be a crime to let anyone with your frail nerves go down there. You can't imagine, even from what you've read and what I've told you, the things I shall have to see and do. It's fiendish work, Carter, and I doubt if any man without ironclad sensibilities could ever see it through and come up alive and sane. I don't wish to offend you, and heaven knows I'd be glad enough to have you with me, but the responsibility is, in a certain sense, mine. and I couldn't drag a bundle of nerves like you down to a probable death or madness. I tell you, you can't imagine what the thing is really like. But I promise to keep you informed over the telephone of every move. You see, I've enough wire here to reach the center of the earth and back. I can still hear, in memory, those coolly spoken words, and I can still remember my remonstrances. They seemed desperately anxious to accompany my friend into those sepulchral depths, yet he proved inflexibly obdurate. At one time, he threatened to abandon the whole expedition if I remained insistent, and it was a threat that proved effective, since he alone held the key to the thing. All this I can still remember, though I no longer know what manner of thing we sought. After he had obtained my reluctant acquiescence in its design, Warren picked up the reel of wire and adjusted the instruments. At one nod, I took off the letter and seated myself upon an aged, discoloured gravestone, close by the newly uncovered aperture. Then he shook my hand, shouldered the coil of wire, and disappeared within that indescribable ossuary. For a minute, I kept sight of the glow of his lantern, and I heard the rustle of the wire as he laid it down after him, but the glow soon disappeared, abruptly, as if a turn in the stone staircase had yet been encountered. And the sound, it died away almost as quickly. I was alone, yet bound to the unknown depths by those magic strands which insulated surface lay green beneath the struggling beams of that waning crescent moon. I constantly consulted my watch by the light of my electric lantern, and listed with feverish anxiety at the receiver of the telephone, but for more than a quarter of an hour I heard nothing. Then, a faint clicking came from the instrument, and I called down to my friend in a tense voice. Apprehensive as I was nevertheless unprepared for the words which came up from that uncanny vault in accents more alarmed and quivering than any I had heard before from Harley Warren. He, who had so calmly left me a little while previously, now called from below in a shaky whisper, more portentous than the loudest shriek. God, if you could only see what I'm seeing! I could not answer. Speechless, I could only wait. Then came the frenzied tones again. Carter, it's terrible. Monstrous, unbelievable. This time, my voice didn't fail me, and I poured into the transmitter a flood of excited questions. Terrified, I continued to repeat, Warren, what is it? What is it? Once more came the voice of my friend, still hoarse with fear, and now apparently tinged with despair. I can't tell you, Carter. It's too utterly beyond thought. I dare not tell you. No man could know it and live. Great God! I could have never dreamed of this. Stillness again, save for my now incoherent torrent of shuddering inquiry. Then, the voice of Warren in a pitch of wilder consternation. Carter, for the love of God, put back the slab and get out of this if you can. Quick, leave everything else and make for the outside. It's your only chance. Do as I say, and don't ask me to explain. I heard, yet was able only to repeat my frantic questions. Around me were the tombs and the darkness and the shadows, below me some peril beyond the radius of human imagination, but my friend was in greater danger than I, and through my fear I felt a vague resentment that he should deem me capable of deserting him in such circumstances. More clicking, and after a pause, a piteous cry from Warren. "Beat it! For God's sake, put back the slab and beat it, Carter!" Something in the boyish slang of my evidently stricken companion unleashed my faculties. I formed and shouted a resolution. "Warren, brace up! I'm coming down!" But at this offer, the tone of my auditor changed to a scream of utter despair. "Don't! You can't understand! It's too late, and my own fault. Put back the slab and run. There's nothing else you or anyone can do now." The tone changed again, and this time acquiring a softer quality, as if hopeless damnation and resignation. Yet it remained tense through anxiety for me. "Quick, before it's too late." I tried not to heed him, tried to break through the paralysis which held me, and to fulfill my vow to rush down to his aid, but his next whisper found me still held inert by the chains of stark horror. "Carter, hurry! It's no use, you must go. Better one than two. The slab!" A pause. More clicking. Then the faint voice of Warren. "Nearly over now. Don't make it harder. Cover up those damned steps and run for your life. You're losing time. So long, Carter. I won't see you again." Here, Warren's whisper swelled into a cry that gradually rose to a shriek fraught with all the horror of the ages. "Gosh, these hellish things! Legions! My God! Beat it! Beat it! Beat it!" After that was silence. I know not how many interminable eons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling, screaming into the telephone. Over and over through those eons I whispered and muttered, called, shouted, and screamed, "Warren! Warren, answer me! Are you there?" And then there came to me the most crowning horror of all, the unbelievable, the unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing. I have said that eons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning, and that only my own cries now broke the hideous silence, but after a while there was a further clicking in the receiver, and I strained my ears to listen. But I again called down. "Warren? Warren, are you there?" And in answer, the thing which has brought this cloud over my mind. I do not try, gentlemen, to account for that thing, that voice, neither can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reaches to the time of my awakening in the hospital. Shall I say that the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was at the end of my experience, and is at the end of my story. I heard it and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery in the hollow, amidst the crumbling stones and the failing tombs, the rank vegetation and miasmal vapours. Heard it well up from the innermost depths of that damnable open sepulchre, as I watched amorphous necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what it said. "You fool. Warren is dead." Ooh, that was spooky. Ooh. I gotta admit, the repetition of the phrase "beat it." As much as Michael Jackson is relevant at this time of day, it's not exactly one would say when somebody is being mauled by unearthly horrors. I would imagine to be something like, "Oh God, I'm being disemboweled," except less humorous and more like actual. "Ah!" That was also humorous. What the hell's wrong with me? Okay, so. Now we move on to the segment of the show which involves me reading something from the internet. Wow, I say. Wow 3 times, because the internet is far scarier than anybody can possibly imagine. And you know what? That's perfectly cool, because scary is my game. Now, the first thing I'm going to read you is a little thing about radio. Oh my goodness gracious. How coincidental. Now, I should be said that before I do this, I need to take a little bit of a sort of a thing, because my voice is starting to lose itself. But you know what? It's a good thing, because it means I can attempt a warm up. I've been told works. So what I do is you hum, apparently, and that is apparently better at making your voice better than clearing your throat. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. So. Let's hum something. Let's hum something wacky. What is things that I can hum? Can't think of anything. I'm gonna type in random catchy song. Addicting, repetitive, catchy song YouTube. I'm not going to hum that because automatic song generator. Yes, this is what we want. Hopefully this won't give the computer malware, because Lord knows every single lyric site is like just flooded with ads and horrible things. Let's see. This isn't going to load, is it? Sod it. Considering we were thinking of Michael Jackson, I'm just going to hum Thriller. That's enough. I tried to do falsetto of Michael Jackson. Didn't work, because Michael Jackson was a king of that, and I'm not even like I'm like the thing you'd find on the bottom of your shoe in terms of singing falsetto. So this next one is Dark Radio, and it is written by Jason Mell. Let's have a look. Let's see what we should start with music-wise. I should say, my music selection, basically all of it comes from an artist called Muji, who is the king of all creepy piano music. He is just... I would kiss the man, but he is probably in some country I wouldn't be able to get to without paying extortionate amounts of money. But the man is a god in terms of making fabulously spooky music, and if you get the chance, look at his YouTube channel. It's YouTube. It's Muji. M-Y... I'm going to actually check what it's spelled. Yeah. M-Y-U-U-J-I. You check that out, you'll be bloody pleased with yourselves, because, oh boy, that man knows how to spook it up. Anyway, let's get down to business with Dark Radio. The general span for FM radio stations usually falls in the range of 79 kHz to 108 kHz. Now, AM stations, meanwhile, generally fall in the range of 530 kHz to 1,750 kHz. Now, within these frequencies, 99% of audible radio lives. And in these parameters, you will find talk radio, rock, rap, country, etc. Basically everything you generally associate with radio. Now, outside these areas, where military stations, used during the wars, and some rogue stations that have all been shut down or discontinued. Now, these areas are known as dark frequencies, or dark radio. No one with specialized radios has heard anything on dark radio for years. Until now. One day, a man came home from the flea market with a highly sensitive military-grade frequency radio. His wife thought it was a worthless piece of crap, but the husband, being a huge history buff, thought it was a wise investment. He hoped to find an active military station, or one that was set up on a constant loop, broadcasting Soviet-era information or war propaganda. He would spend hours a day scanning for stations, and hoping he could find something out there that would make his purchase worthwhile. He would pick one precise frequency at a time and scan the entire range for any activity. Several days went by, digging through static, and he had nothing to show for it, until the day he finally heard something. It was very grainy at first. He tried to fine-tune it as best as possible, but was barely able to make out what was being said. He could hear words, but he was unable to understand them. He went out on the day and brought a sound recorder. When he turned on the radio, he was shocked to find out how much clearer the signal came in. It was still grainy, but he could make something out of it. In a low groan, he heard, "We have." We have? We have what? The man thought to himself. The possibilities were endless. The man noticed that the words kept repeating on a loop. He found exactly what he was looking for, an old abandoned loop station. He turned on the recorder and tried to record the sound as best he could. And the next day, he was going to take it to a studio and see if they could find out exactly what was being said. And the man, he barely got any sleep that night. He was filled with excitement about making such a historical discovery and the world-changing effect it could possibly have. He figured it would be best not to tell his wife about the discovery until he knew for sure what it was. Before he left the house that morning, he turned on the radio again. He set down the recorder, and he realized he wouldn't need it. The station now was a lot clearer with minimal static. It was as if the station was reaching out of his radio. "We have 21. Followed by the sound of two bells, one high-pitched and one low-pitched. The man sat in awe, listening to the loop over and over again. "We have 21, we have 21, we have 21. He would hear the two bells in between each repeating phrase. 21. Is that a code for something? Do they have 21 objects of some sort? He was perplexed. He spent the day doing research, but he ended up with nothing. No mention of the phrase "we have 21" played any significance in history. He waited a day, hoping that the signal would improve in case there was something he couldn't yet hear. Now, when he turned on the radio, the next day he was disappointed to find that it was the same voice repeating the same phrase over and over again, with the two bells in between. Although something seemed different. It took him a few moments to realize, but a faint clicking was heard in the background. Now, it didn't take him too long to realize that it was Morse code. He spent an hour on the computer translating it from scratch and was thrilled to see that it spelt out coordinates. Now, using his GPS, he was able to find the location. It was about a 2-hour drive from where he was. After driving down a few side roads and one really long, deep one into the woods, he had finally reached his destination. It was a large clearing with a massive cube-shaped building in the center. Oh, it must have been about at least 4 stories tall. All 4 signs were grey, and with no marking on the outside as to what the building even was used for. He walked around the entire perimeter of the building and found the only door available. The door was surprisingly unlocked. He walked into the building and saw a giant empty room, dimly lit by dusty rooftop windows, with a single wooden desk and a chair in the middle. Now the place seemed like a giant airplane hangar from the inside. He approached the table and saw a small desk lamp, illuminating a radio broadcasting equipment, complete with transmitter and microphone. It was emitting a deep, ominous, groaning noise. This made no sense. There's no one here. Where's the sound coming from? Now he listened to the groan and noticed that it was changing sound, volume, and length. It didn't take him to realize that it was actually saying, "We have 21. Extremely slowly. He listened for several minutes until the groaning voice stopped after completing the phrase. None of this made any sense. Who was saying this? There's no one here. Why is it sounding so slow? Why is it now silent and not repeating? And where are the bells? At that moment, 2 deafeningly loud bells rang throughout the room. They didn't sound like small bells anymore. They sounded like church bells, being struck with a sledgehammer just inches above his head. He covered his ears and collapsed to the ground. When the sound finally stopped, he uncovered his ears. He looked around the building again, and he noticed it was significantly darker than before. The windows on the roof were no more. There was no door, nor was there a sign of one ever existing. The lamp on the desk was still lit, and all the broadcasting equipment was still there. He was simply surrounded by silence and darkness. Curiosity eventually got the best of his wife later that day. She turned on her husband's radio, clear as day. As if he was standing right in there in the room, she heard his voice. "We have 22. It was silent for a brief moment. Then, static. Oh, it's a twist! Yeah, I like twists. Twists are great in terms of creepy stories because they're the thing that you can definitely build tension up to, or it's something that you can definitely surprise the reader with. That's one of the key things that you do with a lot of scary stories. Like it's basically a cliche at this point, but twists are great if you wanna get into writing stuff like that. But you gotta be careful, because if you do a twist that's been done 8 billion times before, that might be bad, because nobody wants to hear something they've read you've already done. Be dumb. Now, let's see. We still have 10 minutes to read some stuff, but I'm not entirely sure what I want to read, because there was this song. Not song? Blech! It's not song. Story. There was this story that I did want to have a look at, because I thought it looked very, very cool. But it seems to not be around, which is a bit sad, considering that it was actually I found it. Tunda, that's what it's called. It is called Tunda, and it's a diary one. Now this is another common theme cliche in spooky stories nowadays. Diary entries are great because they allow the reader to get into the mindset that this is a thing that definitely happened and a human being is telling me it. Therefore, it is way spookier. This is like writing 101 in terms of like writing stories. If you want to if you're starting out, you either want to make a story with this sort of format, because it's easy to write. Like it's actually quite. All you got to do is like sound like a human being, which shouldn't be too difficult to do unless you're like a robot. And I don't think there are any robots. There are Eldritch Abominations listening in, but we don't talk about them. They're fine. Now, this is a little story about a man who is, well, he's writing a journal, and it's written in the old times, so more Lovecraft. Here's the book. Yeah, there it is. Loud noises. Woo, I love it. Don't you? You probably don't. You're probably getting very sick of that. Wow, that reverb is amazing. I love the echo that it makes. Oh, that's great. But anyway, we have a story that does last 16 minutes and 5 seconds, apparently. Wow. My phone's buzzing. I shouldn't be doing that because I should have turned it off because the phone is not as important as the show. Whoa. Ooh. Oh, the electrical equipment got close to the phone. That messed up the microphone. I just realized that. That is amazing. I should do... Actually, I don't know if that'll cause horrible damage to the microphone if I do that in the show. I'll ask. It's a fun little effect that I could use. I should have used it in the previous story, actually. Ooh, spooky ideas and ways of telling stories have just popped into my head, and it's lovely. Oh God, I'm getting a spooky sort of vibe, and it's growing in my heart, and I'm like, delicious. Anyway, let's get down to business. Not defeat the Hun, but read Thunder, which is a story by... What weird internet name is this? Shadow Swimmer 77. Great. I love internet names because they're weird. And we all love a weird. Anyway, this is Thunder. I hope you enjoy. What the hell? There we go. Mouse was being a bit finicky. The Journal of Thomas Wicker. November 3rd, 1910. There are 1,000 ways to die in the Colombian rainforest. I first gained this appreciation as a boy, when, in a questionable bit of parental inspiration, father allowed me to accompany him to inspect our family's South American holdings in particular, a coffee plantation located on the eastern slopes of the Andes. Now, the expedition was considered almost routine, the chosen path well known to our guards and our guides, yet even so, we encountered no small number of difficulties in our travels. In one case, the hardship was well imposed. A famous spendthrift father only secured enough Peruvian bark for the white members of our party. Plagued the entire way by incessant swarms of disease-bearing mosquitoes, several of the native porters fell ill with the sweats, too fatally. In another instance, we stopped along our route in a small village to rest for a day or two. One of father's men, Mr. Casper by name, went into the jungle with a local girl, his intentions only too clear. Our party received a shock when the girl returned a short time later, naked and completely covered in blood, babbling incessantly in her native tongue. And one of our guides, who spoke the language, eventually got the tale from her. It seems that the throes of passion, Mr. Casper failed to notice the stealthy approach of one Panthera onca, that most deadly of Amazonian cats. The feline made short work of the man, powerful jaws latching mercilessly onto the back of his exposed neck, while the girl, pinned beneath the victim, could only watch helplessly. We found him the next day hanging from high branches of a tree, bloodless, and stored like so much meat in an icebox for later consumption. Father, proclaiming Mr. Casper's demise as a ripened fruit of the man's own stupidity, would not deign to give him a burial. Rather, we continued on our way on to the plantation, the body left to the beast who had claimed it through those ancient rites of the hunt. All said, the trip was extremely educational, if in an utterly unconventional sort of way. Returning home to America after several long months of travel, my young mind was open to the disparity that existed in the world. Never more aware of the benefits offered me by the accrued wealth of my family, I am unsure the precise effect Father had hoped my accompanying him on the journey would induce, but I do know that he must have viewed the reality as a most spectacular failure. I had tasted the life of the explorer, the excitement, and the danger, and found it wanting. What was adventure to the modern comforts of a privileged life? I swore an oath to myself that I would never again be deprived of modern convenience, that the most daring I would be, or the most daring thing I would undertake would be through culinary experiences, or perhaps seducing the exotic princess of a foreign land. I threw myself into this newly chosen lifestyle with gusto, and can accordingly mark with some significant accuracy when Father's eventual hatred of me took seed in our relationship. It is with some surprise, I find myself now returning to that same plantation I visited in my youth. Since Father's death almost a decade ago, I've generally allowed proxies to take care of the day-to-day responsibilities of managing the family holdings. Father ensured he only employed the most educated lawyers, selected the hardest-willed and most obedient men as his overseers and foremen. And so the Wicker estate has continued to run itself as some kind of great machine, whose engineer has long since abandoned the controls. This is fortunate, as I have no particular interest in business myself, a fact that no doubt served as another blight on my character in Father's eyes. But certain circumstances demand my attention. Now, I will refrain from again recounting in these pages the strange events surrounding Father's murder. Just so, I have utterly failed to convince any others of the verity of such tales, and I have subsequently ceased to make the attempt lest I'm thought more cracked than Father in his final days. No matter. They were not there. They did not see what my eyes beheld them, or since. Indeed, much as my expedition with Father first opened my mind to the nature of privileged life, so too did his death widen my perspective to those ungodly hidden things with which men share this world, like a jaguar silently stalking the Amazonian canopy. It is due to this enlightened viewpoint, one that allows the existence of the fantastic and occult alongside the otherwise commonplace and mundane, that I am responding personally to the devilry currently afflicting the operation of my Colombian plantation. I received a letter just over a month ago from Mr. Giles, long-time overseer of the family. Life near the Andes jungle is tenuous at best, and, well, with death being a hair's breadth away, as illustrated by my own youthful journey. Yet, Mr. Giles reported recent events were perpetuated by something far more than any such commonly suffered maladies. It was this past June that the first of the disappearances had occurred. Initially, a small thing, a native man or two, failing to show up at his picking shift. Such absences were easily attributed to a hard night drinking or a simple decision to move on the plantation. The work was hard and unforgiving, and turnover was regularly high among the labourers, but after a week of disappearances, with none of a dozen or so men managing a return from their absences, it became clear that something more sinister was afoot. Mr. Giles ordered the foreman to interview the labourers, forcefully enough to determine they were being truthful in their ignorance as to the nature of their disappearances. Indeed, all that was ascertained by the inquiry was that the victims had to this point been young men between the age of 16 and 30, and all had vanished sometime during the hours past sundown. Confirming a further lack of knowledge among the general population, Mr. Giles proceeded along a logical line of reasoning. It was not unheard of for a local predator to gain a taste for man-flesh, much as in the case of Mr. Casper's undignified demise. The foreman organised a rotating series of hunting parties to conduct forays into the jungle, searching for some sign of the murderous beast or its victims. To no avail. Since an active confrontation with the culprit had proven unsatisfactory, a number of clever devices were rigged near the perimeter of the plantation, as well as outside the small adjoining village, in which the majority of the workers lived. Mr. Giles' overseers were a hard, experienced lot, and comprised a broad collective knowledge of fieldcraft and ingenuity reflected in the nature of their improvised booby traps. Tiger pits from Burma, man catchers from Malaysia, punji stakes, deadfalls, and a dozen other such deadly workings were employed, their construction taking on a competitive air, as each man sought to outdo his compatriots. But despite these Herculean efforts, the disappearances continued unabated, until almost a tenth of Mr. Giles's force had gone missing. Men began abandoning the plantation in droves, unwilling to wager their lives even in defense of their livelihood, with ultimately only 1 in 4 men choosing to stay on. The November harvest, ripe and unpicked, the beans in danger of rotting, it was with deepest regret Mr. Giles was at last forced to report the inevitability that the plantation's productions would fail to meet quota. Oh, wow. Where the heck? Oh, God. My music's gone somewhere. Ridiculous. There it is. Okay. To be honest, news of the potential lost revenue didn't overly concern me. My family's holdings are extravagantly vast and varied, possessing shares in everything from oil fields in Turkey to the fisheries off the shores of Nova Scotia. The downturn of a single plantation would scarcely be noticeable absence amidst the Wicker Estate's annual profits, never mind the fact that accrued wealth held in banks and markets across the world is already significant enough to persist for at least several lifetimes. As I have previously stated thus, I am hardly a business wunderkind, and possessing the acumen that would allow the plantation to turn calamity to glorious success. To the contrary, I am sure that the crop will fail. Indeed, since receiving Mr. Giles's letter, I've resolved to close the facility, as even the thought of the effort necessary to recover the plantation once this crisis has reached its revolution bores me to tears. I don't need the money, God knows. Better to simply close the damned thing and be done with it, but not yet. No, not yet. You see, though I care little for coffee or the beans from which it comes since Father's death, I have developed an obsession with the unexplicable. I have learned far more than I once have ever imagined for 8 years scouring the world, defying my more natural inclinations to merely abide in the existence of simple luxury. I have seen things, many wonderful and strange. I have gradually begun to ever so gently peel back the thin veneer that separates our waking world from how things truly are. And gods, it is exhilarating and terrifying. It is in pursuit of this that I find myself returning to Columbia. For in his report, Mr. Giles admitted that, while he did not know wherein the rumour began that the plantation was being haunted shortly after the disappearances, began a word which was on the breath of every man, white and brown, still remaining at the facility. Thunder. Now the name, previously complete unknown to me, pointed research into the matter offered but little illumination. Described as a changeling, who often takes the form of a loved one or a beautiful woman to lure victims into its grasp, reports vary across a region with little support ranging from one account to the other. Indeed, my study could not even reach a consensus regarding the fate of the thing's victims, whether their blood is drunk like fine wine or they are devoured whole. Most odd is that the creature's shape-shifting ability is often reported as imperfect, with some aspect of the being's true form remaining visible, while the rest is disguised. Oftentimes a deformed leg. I do not believe this last. In my experience with Fantastic, such a chink in the predator's armor, some telltale sign enabling the unwary prey to spot his otherwise indistinguishable hunter, is more like to be wishful thinking than actual reality. An illusion of hope. Though I had never heard of the thunder prior to Mr. Giles' skeptical report, I have known its like. I do not anticipate its identification will be so conveniently forthcoming. Now, having departed from New York to the port of this is a big word. Cartagena, I have nothing to do but wait until I make my landing. I rode ahead to Mr. Giles, requesting he provide an escort to meet my ship and guide me to the plantation. With luck, I shall avoid the pitfalls of my previous excursion here, and ought to be arrived to the property within the month. The situation November 20th, 1910. The situation at the plantation has degraded far worse than reported in Mr. Giles' letter. Since I last wrote, good weather favoured my ship's passage, and I was pleasantly surprised to be met upon debarkation by Mr. Lyle Macready within Mr. Giles' employ. Now, a veteran of the Indian Wars, Mr. Macready is a strong, capable sort, if in possession of something of a foul disposition. Still, his demeanour improved markedly when I revealed the case of good Kentucky bourbon stowed within my luggage. And soon he and the 2 porters he had secured had me well on my way to the facility. With 2 mounts per man, we made good time. Far better than on my previous expedition, and within 10 days had travelled almost 300 miles to the plantation, near the Venezuelan border, at Cucuta. There it is. The mood of our little party took a discernible downturn this morning as we neared our destination, and soon all traces of goodwill had retreated from Mr. Macready's stony countenance. His eyes shifting continuously from one side of the trail to the other, his hand never strayed far from the large revolver already loosened in the holster worn upon his hip, and all the while the looming trees seeming to close in around our little band. We were perhaps 3 miles from the plantation when the smell ambushed us, the customary bitterness of the coffee beans mixed with such a sick sweetness as they turned sour. There was something unsettling about that final leg of the journey that took me several uncomfortable minutes to identify. The sounds of the jungle. Or rather, their absence. Other than the gentle hoof-beats of our mules alone, along the worn dirt track the foul air was silent, empty of bird call and insect alike. The land was already dead, the presence of the plantation merely artificially extending the semblance of life. Passing between the fields of rotted plants, we at last reached the facility properly. It appeared much as I remembered from my youth, a high-wire fence surrounded the large drying shacks, shucking annex, and mills, adjoining a modest administrative building which served as both office and living area for Mr. Giles and the overseers. Now, a bit further down the road, I could just spy the small outcrop of buildings comprising the workers' village. I recalled from my last trip an omnipresent haze of smoke hanging over the huts from cooking fires and stove, a constant state of bustling motion as the pickers came and went from their barracks, joking and laughing in their shared camaraderie. But now the air was clear, and the lack of movement as haunting as the silent jungle. We were greeted at the gate of the compound by Mr. Giles himself. Always a bear of a man. He seemed much unchanged from when I first met him, but for a great deal more grey in the beard. He ushered us into the relative safety of the wire fence, where we offloaded the mules and sent the porters on their way before proceeding into the office, Mr. Giles hobbling ahead on a makeshift crutch. While reiterating the profuse apologies of his original correspondent, he explained that since his letter, the tundra had become emboldened as the population of the camp dwindled. At night, its chilling cries, a strange amalgamate of animal howl and maniacal cackle, could be heard echoing throughout the surrounding jungle. Mr. Giles temporarily reintegrated armed patrols into the daily routine, hoping to catch the creature unaware, but the diminished manpower had forced him to perpetuate in the hunt himself. One such excursion, about a week past, he'd witnessed a man on his flank jerked violently into the brush. Mr. Giles charged out for the victim, his yell startling the rest of the stalking party, and in the ensuing conflagration, one of the workers discharged his rifle into the jungle, where Mr. Giles had disappeared, inadvertently striking him through the thigh. The wound, while painful, had fortunately avoided major blood vessels and was not life-threatening. In the days since Mr. Giles had suspended the patrols, deciding that the likelihood of success did not outweigh the associated hazards. More so, his injury served as a catalyst to drive out those few workers heretofore still remaining in the camp, effectively making such regular hunts impossible. The only souls still manning the plantation were Mr. Giles himself and the half-dozen white overseers whom he shared the administrative living space. 9 men, all told with the addition of myself and Mr. Macready. As Mr. Giles provided us with this update, I could not help this niggling suspicion that gradually began to worm my way into my mind. My thoughts turned to that one unlikely detail of my research, in which the tundra is able to transmogrify all but one of its lower limbs. Therefore, I continue to doubt this limitation. Is it true? Would a seemingly wounded leg, well wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, not serve as a capable disguise? Oh, but no, surely others saw the occurrence of the injury, helped him treat it, and what's more, the man remembers details of our first meeting and from all of those years past. I've decided I will not besmirch his leg's dignity to require much of this detailed examination of his leg. At least not until the circumstances demand it. Night has fallen as I am writing this entry, but I have not yet heard the strange echoing cries Mr. Giles described. Perhaps some predatory instinct has warned the beast of what my arrival portends, and sent it scurrying back to its lair. I am not some native, crippled by fear and superstition, nor am I a typical Westerner, handicapped by willful ignorance and denial. I almost pity the fool thing. Tonight I will rest, for the long journey has left me utterly sapped. But tomorrow, the hunt begins in earnest. November 21, 1910, morning. God damn me for a fool. In the night, Mr. Giles went missing along with 3 of the remaining overseers. We are now but 5 left. Myself, Mr. Macready, and Messrs. Gerard, Buckbald, and Foster. The beast did not make its presence known. None of us had heard or observed any sign of their departure, and thus I cannot determine whether Mr. Giles was in fact the creature in disguise, or merely another of its victims. I have drastically underestimated my foe, and I have ordered Mr. Macready to outfit the men with supplies and an abundance of firearms. It is my intent to make our way into the jungle and track the hellspawn to where it must now be resting, drowsy from gorging itself, and make an end to it. November 21st, 1910. Evening. We entered the jungle as planned, and soon had the thing's tail. The thing's trail, I say. Though Mr. Macready and the others were experienced woodsmen, they did not have the requisite knowledge to track thing only vestigially of our world as I do. As we went, I attempted to educate them in the means of identifying such a trail sign, but with minor success. Near midday we emerged into an unnatural clearing, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, its perimeter marked by 4 large standing stones about 8 feet in height, and covered in symbols unknown to any of us, but appearing to be of exotic origin. My nearest available analogy, some early Proto-Arabic writings I once studied, at a British museum in London. Now, the north-facing stone was not asunder by some unknown means. I can effectively breaking the circle, as the others rested, I made an examination of the clearing, wherefore I came upon a small artifact, the likeness of a woman, carved from a white compound, perhaps bone, and oddly warm to the touch. Placing the idol in my pocket, I moved to rouse the men and continue our pursuit when I discovered Mr. Buckwald had vanished. Upon this realization, Misters Gerard and Foster were driven to rage, their anger misguidedly directed against me. Apparently they believed they would have been otherwise long departed from the plantation had I not insisted on making my visitation, and blamed me for what they now perceived as all but certain doom. As they moved against me, throwing me to the ground while removing large knives from their belts in an wholly threatening manner, my defence came from a most unexpected quarter, as Mr. McGready drew his great pistol and in short order splattered the contents of both men's skulls on the jungle floor. Helping me to my feet, Mr. McGready suggested that we retire to the plantation, load up the mules with the remaining supplies, and move on to the Cartega. Though a part of me cried achingly to continue our pursuit of the Tunda, I was forced to agree with his assessment of our unfavourable situation, and acquiesced to this proposed course of action. I refused to take blame for getting lost on the way back to the compound, for, as I've said, my woodcraft is highly specialised in tracking those beings of the supernatural. In truth, Mr. McCready should have insisted on leading far sooner than he did. By the time he took command of our route and got us back to the proper heading, twilight had fully set in. I am unsure whether it was my superior perception or divine intervention that allowed me to step past the hidden pit unharmed, but in either case, Mr. McCready was not unfortunate. The hole, one of the traps previously set to catch the creature, had been dug about 8 feet deep, the bottom arranged with sharp stakes coated with a foul-smelling substance. Even in the waning light I could make out a pool of blood rapidly forming beneath Mr. McCready, from which he lay impaled, one hand raised towards me in a pleading gesture, desperation emanating from his pain-stricken face. I briefly debated making an attempt to remove him from the pit, and an ominous stirring of the nearby undergrowth made me reconsider. I am not proud that I left him there, but there was nothing to be done, his imminent death agonizingly obvious. His pleading sobs will surely haunt my dreams. As I have successfully returned to the administrative building and made a makeshift barricade to bar the door. Tomorrow, I shall load the mules and begin my long journey to the coast. November 22nd, 1910. The morning sun awoke me from an uneasy sleep. Moving to the paddock to saddle the mules, I found the poor beasts slaughtered, black tongues already swelling where they lay amidst a bed of their own innards. Contemplating my options as I moved back towards the office, I was startled by a low series of moans emanating from near the entrance gate. Drawing my pistol and wary of a trick, I cautiously made my way to locate the source. I was shocked to find 2 bodies sprawled in the dirt outside the locked gate. The first was Mr. McCready, pale and still leaking from the puncture wound in his thigh, his belt and scraps of cloth tied to the stem, the worst of the flow. Next to him lay Mr. Giles, naked, his bullet-wounded leg swollen and angry red. Each man in turn begged for my help, imploring me to let him into the gate and shoot the other, who was clearly the monster in disguise. As I stood silent and unsure, contemplating these 2 men and their similarly wounded legs, their entreaties became more desperate, then violent. In a flash of sudden inspiration, I knew only one choice I could make. I shot both men in the head. To my disappointment, neither reverted to the Tunda's true form, but then none of my research indicated such a revealing would occur. Even if both were in fact who they claimed, I cannot feel much regret, as neither would have survived the journey ahead in such a state without the mules. I have rigged one of the saddlebags to allow me to carry as many supplies as I have comfortably able, pistols and ammunition ready at the belt, and I have now travelled my intended route 3 times in my life, and I am confident I can find my way. Perhaps, once I reach the village in which Mr. Casper met his ultimately demise, I will be able to acquire a mule or even a porter. 300 miles over stinking inhospitable land, stalked by another worldly being is nothing, man, of my experience, a trifle. Yes, nothing at all. I once wrote that there are 1,000 ways to die in the Colombian rainforest. As I finish this entry, a low, keening wail rising from the surrounding jungle amends me. 1001. Ooh, I like that. That was fun. That was a fun one. I love... One of the most interesting things to read from stories like this are creatures, as many of you guessed. Think when people are creating stories that are spooky, when they nail it in terms of creating something horrifying. Actually, I'm going to check if the Tunda's an actual thing, because if it is, then oh boy, I have missed out. Yep, it's a thing. Wikipedia. The Tunda is a myth of the Pacific coastal region of Colombia and Ecuador, and particularly in the Afro-American community of the Choco? C-O-H-O-C. O with the little accent department. That a shape-shifting entity resembling a human female that lures people into the forests and keep them there. Oh my, oh me. It wasn't a panther at all that killed Mr. Casper. It was the Tunda, you know? Jesus. It's pretty rad. Anyway, yeah, that about wraps us up. 10:21. Made it! I beat my previous time, so that's great. So you have more to listen to, which is fabulous, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. That's the main thing I want to take away. What I want you to take away from this, that you enjoyed this, because if you did, excellent. I'm glad you were scared. If you were upset by the amount of times I mumbled my words and blah 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 blah, then that's also fine, because I intend to make sure that I don't do that in next shows. Maybe you find it amusing as well, in which case that's fine. Anyway, I am glad you all, if there are any people listening. And yeah, have a very happy Halloween in 5 days. This has been the Spook Zone. I am your fabulous host, and I wish you all a very spooky night. Stay spooky.